Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to today's webinar event brought to you by Agility PR Solutions. We've got another great presentation ahead for you today and one on an age-old topic. So thanks for being with us. This one is called, this is the family hour, so let's say this one's called What to Do When the Shite Hits the Fan. I'm Richard Carafeld, editor of Bulldog Reporter and The Daily Dog, one of the web's leading sources of PR and marketing communications news and insights. Agility PR Solutions offers a world-class suite of PR services, including media database, media monitoring, and measurement tools. You can find out about all their offerings and how they can put together a package that's just right for you at agilitypr.com. Oh, and you can visit agilitypr.com/bulldogreporter to check out our homepage with all of our original PR articles and thought leadership pieces. And while you're there, you can sign up to receive the Daily Dog for free. Okay, we're very happy to welcome today's guest presenter. It's Ron Sachs. Thanks for your time. How are you today, Ron?
Good day. I'm really happy to be here and appreciate the opportunity to present to our professional peers around North America.
Wonderful. Well, we are glad to have you. Tell you a little bit about Ron. He is the founder and CEO of Sachs Media Group down there in sunny Florida, which combines great storytelling and instinctual nose for news and solid media relationships to get clients' causes, issues, and brands covered. He is a message master, a big idea generator, and a tenacious client advocate who always stays cool, calm, and collected in a crisis. And he knows how these crises work from both sides, as he's also an award-winning former journalist as a government investigative reporter for the Miami Herald and editorial director for Miami's ABC affiliates. Alrighty, we're about to get started here in just a minute, but let me first tell you that Ron will be responding to your questions following his presentation today. So if you have one for him at any point during the hour, you can just click on the Q&A icon in the top right corner of your screen and type in your inquiry there. And we're going to hold that Q&A until after Ron is finished with his formal presentation. But we will get to as many questions as we can, and it's kind of a first come, first serve, so make sure to get yours in the queue. Alrighty then, without further ado, let's get started with today's presentation and learn some great tips for navigating through crisis. And here's Ron Sachs.
Well, Richard, thank you very much. Thanks to Agility PR Solutions and Bulldog Reporter for the opportunity to present this presentation, which we hope and expect will be informative, entertaining, and even a little humorous. But there are serious issues at the heart of what we're presenting about the nature of crisis. In our 24th year, our firm has become very expert and experienced in handling crises, and we're going to deal with firsthand experience in the lessons we try to impart to all of you to help you do a better job in your own course of work for your clients or even your own organizations. So we did come up with this title, When the Shot Hits the Fan. I'll clean that up as Richard did, and package this as kind of a top 10 crisis communications tips. And there is our visual of the stuff hitting the fan, and you'll see the nature of crises can come in many forms, but they're all bad. It's disaster, corruption, threat, emergency, catastrophe, theft, financial crisis, sex scandals, cheating, lying, you name it. They're all potential crises. And the crisis within a crisis is not handling it properly and in advance not preparing for it. The fact of the matter is a crisis can strike any public institution, any governmental entity, any corporation, any not-for-profit, and even any agency in our industry or a law firm, and so on. So these tips are intended to be applicable to almost any situation involving crisis for a public, private, or not-for-profit entity. Some headlines here to show you some highlights of some crises we've actually been directly involved in at our firm. And I'll drill down a little deeper on some of these later in this short, fast-moving presentation. But a town in Florida called Waldo was about to be outed on national TV by the CBS Evening News for supposedly operating one of the worst speed traps to intentionally catch drivers going too fast as a revenue generator for the little town. When CBS News showed up on their doorstep, they called me, and I left my office in Tallahassee, the state capital of Florida, and drove about 2 hours to get to Waldo so I could intervene and help handle this crisis, because the city officials were kind of cowering behind closed doors, not knowing what to do, and we were able to help them out in that situation. The Amateur Athletic Union, mostly in the United States, which is the #1 organization for sports involvement of boys and girls of multiple ages, the #1 organization for adult volunteers and coaches, had a sex scandal break on ESPN, where it was alleged that their longtime then president had molested 2 boys back in the 80s when he was not AAU president. And that revelation or accusation came out in a 1-hour nationally broadcast ESPN special called Outside the Lines. We were called in to help AAU through that crisis. And again, many of the principles that we're going to talk about are applicable here to any kind of crisis. And that's why we're going to show you some different ones that have been handled well and ones that have been handled not so well. So just to simplify for your digestion, we think crises generally take 2 forms, fiscal or physical. So on the fiscal, somebody stole something, embezzlement, money is missing, something costs too much. And on the physical side, it could be a sex scandal, a harassment scandal, a violent incident, an accident, a natural disaster, somebody stole something. In any of those situations, which also could be translated this way, they're personal or personnel. So HR issues are among the most difficult ones any organization may have to deal with. So on the personal and personnel, some of these same kinds of crises are involved: discrimination, substance abuse, and unexpected death. And again, the problem is if you don't have a plan for handling a crisis, you are almost compounding a crisis that hasn't happened yet by your inactivity in advance. Here in Florida, we're very vulnerable to hurricane season for 6 months of the year, and if you don't prepare for what to do when a hurricane is bearing down on the state, that's the disaster after the disaster of not being properly prepared. So too, the crises that we're talking about can be human-made. The very few of them are natural. Somebody's at fault. That's why professionals in the automotive safety industry don't like to talk about car accidents, but about collisions, because usually someone is to blame for what happened. So there are some basic principles to be mindful of, and we're going to kind of break it down as a top 10 list. And so #1 is to be prepared, to have a plan when you're not in crisis about what to do, God forbid, if you do enter a crisis or a client or a friend. Some of these principles could even be applicable to you in your personal life, because we're all emotional when we're in a crisis in our own family or in our own work. So these principles can have application for any of you in your daily lives. We don't wish a crisis on anybody, but if you're not planning for it, you are compounding it in advance, as I said earlier. So we like to say it's not if a crisis is going to happen, but count on it, gosh forbid, that it's going to happen. It's only a matter of when, and you need to plan for it now. You need to have a plan, a team, be willing to adapt it based on the changing landscape of the actual crisis when it erupts. But again, the #1 tip is be prepared and have a plan. So to lighten up this first tip, we have a clip from a movie that's several years old starring Jim Carrey, one of my favorite comedic actors. And the movie was called Fun with Dick and Jane. His wife in the movie was Téa Leoni. But this scene is the worst nightmare for a spokesperson. Jim Carrey's character is the VP of communications for a big corporation, and he's on like a national cable program, and he does not have the facts of what they're going to ask him about. He thinks he does, but he is blindsided by his own company doing something financially wrong, unethical, if not illegal, but they haven't told him, and yet they've sent him out to represent the organization on national television. This is painful to watch, but you all will relate to the fact that this would be the worst thing that can happen to a spokesperson, and we're glad it's not happening to us. So let's roll with Jim Carrey in Fun with Dick and Jane for a couple minutes.
How you doing, Dick? Just terrific, Sam. Thanks for asking. And
Well, that was a very lighthearted way to underscore this first point, be prepared to have a plan. Obviously, not Jim Carrey's character's fault here that he did not have the facts to represent his organization. They hid the truth from him. So the things to consider when you are getting prepared with a plan, okay, is who's going to be your spokesperson. We're going to get our slides back up there in a minute when we can get this freeze frame of Jim Carrey off the screen. But let me go through some important notes for you here. So you have to pick a spokesperson who's not going to be a deer in the headlights. That's why the Jim Carrey image is the one that should be frozen in your mind as the picture's frozen on the screen right now. So you have to have someone who's confident and competent and who can handle the situation with the facts and the truth. And you have to determine what channels you're going to use to update the public. And you have multiple audiences with whom you need to communicate. Some of them would be your own people. You certainly need to tell your own employees or clients, staff, what's going to happen before it's going to happen if you're going public with some crisis. You cannot keep them in the dark because then you are compounding the crisis by not communicating and being candid and transparent with your own people. You probably also need to communicate with your customers or your clients when bad news is about to break. So what channels will you use to communicate with them? Sometimes it will be an in-person meeting. Sometimes it will be email or phone calls. You need to be able to adapt and adjust based on the severity of the crisis and what you need to do. You also need to consider how often to provide updates about the situation and who's on the crisis team, what role do they have in a situation room, if you will, and who is going to craft statements, who is going to approve them, and who is going to disseminate them. So we are having a little bit of technical difficulty here, folks, with the slides, but I'm going to take you through these key points orally, and if we can get the slides back up, we'll be fine. But please hang in with us because the content I'm trying to present to you, while it's aided and abetted by some slides, if you are stressed to take some notes here, I'm pretty sure this presentation will be available for you to see later, the slides, but I'll go through everything orally with you now. So the first tip, again, be prepared, have a plan. The second tip is get the facts fast. I was a newsman in the earlier part of my career, and I consider what we do in our public relations office the private practice of journalism. We operate a newsroom of sorts for our clients and our projects. And as in any newsroom of a newspaper, radio, or television station, or cable operation, the idea is to get the facts and get the truth and share the information. Your job is not to hide the truth, but to reveal the truth, because you have to assume that the truth is always going to come out. So, clients have sometimes asked us when they're in their crosshairs of controversy, do we have to tell the truth? And that's almost childlike, and that's how freaked out people get when they're in the crosshairs of controversy about a crisis. So if there was any doubt, let me just reinforce, absolutely always tell the truth. Tell the truth with the facts as you know them, as you gather them, in as close to real time as possible, because again, assume it's all going to come out anyway, and you should err on the side of sharing information. Our friends at Agility PR Solutions are advancing the slides. So number two, again, get the facts, never lie. Now, you see an information funnel because requests for information may come in lots of places at your organization or at the client organization, but you need to make sure that information that is shared is controlled, not in a Machiavellian way, but in an appropriate way, so that you have a consistent, unified message, consistently delivered with discipline, but that narrow opening at the bottom is how you control it by making sure the right spokespeople are sharing information, the right platforms are being used, and we're dealing with facts and truth. And again, this is not like the old days where the newspaper is going to bed at midnight tonight and we got to get something to them before midnight. The news cycle now is 24/7, and if you're handling a crisis, you kind of need to be on guard 24/7 too, not just with your proactive positive moves, but with looking out if anybody's attacking you in the social media spaces. So we have another clip to show on Get the Facts Fast, Never Lie, and it deals with the controversy and tragedy about the Boeing aircraft, the 737s, that had two horrible tragedies, and for way too long a period of time, Boeing was sitting on their hands, essentially pointing the finger of blame at everybody but Boeing. They waited 25 days between the initial incident in Ethiopia and then an eventual issuing of an apology and statement. And the timeline was this. Ethiopia grounded 737s on March 10th. Boeing spoke with President Trump on March 12th. And Captain Sullenberger, the hero of the landing on the Hudson River, wrote an op-ed critical of the company on March 19th. But it wasn't until April 4th that the Boeing CEO released an apology video. And frankly, too little, too late. And while the statement was very good for taking responsibility, it's reported in the news today that Boeing has considered they've lost $1 billion by having the 737s grounded up to now. But I would submit to you that the damage to the Boeing brand is much deeper than $1 billion. The PR damage to their brand, the trust in their brand, suffered a much bigger loss than $1 billion because they were too slow to respond with the facts and the truth. So let that be a lesson to all of us. So we are going to move on to yet another apology. And frankly, I think the videos are not working, so we're going to just stay with our content here. So I like to say that if you have bad news, don't wait for it to break around you. Break your own bad news in your own terms, on your own turf, on your own timeline. Again, assume that everyone's going to know what's wrong. It's going to come out on the front page. It's going to be a lead story, worst case scenario for crisis coverage. And we think there is total merit in being your own bad news breakers, okay? Break your own bad news. You have a better opportunity to control the story with the facts and the truth. And I'm going to keep saying facts and truth because you're not going to fudge. You're not going to lie. You're going to share the facts and the truth. And it helps acquit the organization, even if the organization made a mistake, much better than denying the facts and truth, delaying the facts and the truth. Discover them and break them and share them. And it's much easier to give the truth, and people will forgive a mistake, but they will not forgive an arrogance of delay or denial when the truth eventually comes out. So, the number 3 tip, which I've sort of alluded to heavily here, is break your own bad news. And we'll give you one specific example where we help the client do that at a very high level. So the Miami Beach Community Health Center is one of the many federally qualified health centers in the country that does a wonderful job providing health care to mostly poor and low-income people. Before any bad news had broken, they contacted us with lawyers from Washington, D.C., and our state capital here in Tallahassee to say that they were pretty sure that their longtime CEO, a woman who had won every business and humanitarian award you could possibly win in the Miami area, had embezzled $7 million from the federally qualified health center over a period of a few years. No one else was compliant in this theft of this breathtaking $7 million. So she wasn't arrested yet. She wasn't charged yet. She was suspended and on leave, and the federal government was investigating, putting a case together. And what we suggested to the Miami Beach Community Health Center, and it took their lawyers a couple of weeks to come around and agree with us, is that we should break the story. We should give the story to the Miami Herald. So here you'll see the front page headline in the Miami Herald, where we gave the story to the Herald, and we negotiated with the top editors at the Herald that let's separate the good guy organization, the health center, from the bad CEO who ultimately was charged with serious crimes. And by the way, her excuse or explanation for the theft was she was a gambling addict. But we wanted to make sure that the client here, the good guy organization, was not painted with a dark hat, but that the person responsible for the theft was the one outed. So this strategy worked perfectly well, and while it wasn't a press release, the story well served the organization, which continues to serve a poor public with good health services in Miami Beach today, their reputation intact, the CEO accountable for what she did wrong. So our number 4 tip is to never say no comment. And here's where we sometimes butt heads with lawyers. We have great respect for lawyers, and there may be some listening to this presentation, but they are expert at what may end up being tried in a court of law. But if you or your organization or a client entity is in the crosshairs of controversy and crisis, the worst thing you can ever say is no comment. You know, you're cloaked in that veil of innocence when you go into a courtroom. There's a presumption of innocence, but the rules are different in the court of public opinion. In the court of public opinion, if you say nothing in your own defense, if the newspaper, the TV station said Sachs would not comment, Sachs declined to comment, Sachs was not available for response on being the client in this situation, the people who read or hear that story are going to say there must be something to the allegation, they must be guilty, they must be wrong, they're afraid to talk. So we are strong advocates that it's almost an absolute that you have to say something, even if you can't say much. You have to say something on your own behalf. But the worst thing that can happen is for you to be quoted not saying anything, would not respond, did not comment. So our biggest takeaway for you with today's presentation is that near absolute that never should you say no comment. You can say we're cooperating with authorities in the investigation. While this is still under investigation, we're not at liberty to speak about this because of the investigative authorities requesting or requiring that. But again, at least that is something as opposed to no comment, which carries some other implications with it. So we have another video here, which is kind of amusing, but really, here's an executive with a healthcare entity. His name's Stephen Duckett, whose arrogance, obnoxiousness, and abrasiveness in the middle of what is intended to be an interview about some simple questions, well, okay, I'm told the video is not going to play. So anyway, what he's doing is eating a cookie while a reporter is walking with him. He continues to eat the cookie and says, I'm eating a cookie, which is as close to a no comment with sweets in your mouth as you can get. He was treated very badly, deservedly so. All he could have done was say, I'm happy to have an availability with you news media folks in a few minutes. Please make an appointment, and we can do that in an hour or two. But he did not. So our number 5 tip is, again, the need to communicate with multiple audiences. Depending on the organization, you certainly need to tell the truth, the facts and the truth to your own people, to your customers, other audiences, or the general public, decision makers, public policy makers. And while the press are also an audience all by themselves, they are a vehicle to help us reach these other audiences along with the social media platforms. But failure to communicate with your own people deepens a crisis because it would be read that you don't trust them enough to tell them the truth. Again, people will forgive a mistake, even a large mistake, but they're very unforgiving, appropriately so, for the arrogance of self-righteousness that cost some people a deeper crisis. Think about the Penn State University sex scandal. The damage to their brand is in the triple-digit millions, and they're still coming back from a crisis that happened years ago. And the crisis after the crisis was their inaction or their lack of strong, decisive action early on in that crisis. So communicate with all audiences, and Taco Bell did this in a very interesting way. In 2011, Taco Bell's parent company was sued over the alleged contents of the meat it was using in its food products. The lawsuit alleged that the company's seasoned beef really only contained 35% beef, and that Taco Bell was lying in its advertising. That's a serious allegation to a really big brand where you can drive through even in the middle of the night in some markets. So Taco Bell declared that these claims were false, and they proactively shared with the public that their actual meat is 88% beef and 12% secret recipe. Personally, I'd be a little curious myself about the secret recipe, but that's the Taco Bell brand. 88% is quite a big difference in real meat from 35%. They launched a very active PR campaign to combat these bogus allegations, and their fans, their customers who love them, were activated on social media, came to their defense, and less than 4 months later, the bogus lawsuit was dropped, and Taco Bell averted a disaster. Now, if they had dug in their heels and said this is a matter for our lawyers to handle, then that brand would have been under a cloud. It probably would have suffered a loss of business of people who thought the allegations might be true, even though it had never had its day in court. They went to the court of public opinion, and they won, and never had to go to a court of law. So that's an essential point. Communicate with all audiences. And let's go back to that audience of the media. Not only an audience, but a way to reach many of these other audiences. Again, you can't just have a statement and say, well, that's it, and then say nothing. If it's a crisis that involves people getting hurt or killed, you have a need for regular updates. A disciplined message from a practiced spokesperson who's comfortable under stress and can handle the glare of the limelight and the television lights, but you've got to say something regular. It's got to be facts and truth, even if it only advances the story a little bit. The media are going to go with stories even with very few facts, and they'll have a breathless tone to them. Someone will fill that space who's a critic of the client organization that's in crisis. You have to help fill that space with regular updates and the facts and the truth. And one thing that's really important is to show a caringness. Now, this comes naturally to some public officials, not so naturally to others. You may all be familiar and remember the tragic Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, Florida, at a mostly gay nightclub, where an active shooter went in there and just tragically killed so many people. And the mayor of Orlando, who's still the mayor, Buddy Dyer, in a live interview with Scott Pelley of CBS News, showed a natural, caring heart. You see a freeze frame there of Mayor Dyer on the right, Scott Pelley on the left. And Mayor Dyer, he was emotional, but he was dealing with facts and truth. And he said the kinds of comforting things that you would want your mayor to say. And he got national credit for being a calming influence in the throes of that crisis. That community is still healing from that crisis, like other communities that have had tragic active shooters. But if you don't have someone in command who can calm people and show a strength of leadership, that too is a compounded crisis after the crisis. In this case, the community bound up in unity around this tragedy and the families that were all touched by it and the community that was touched by it. And it's kind of a textbook case in how a public official helped calm and soothe his community. And that clip hopefully might be available some other time, but we're having a problem with the videos today. Anyway, another situation where a public official who you may respect and like a lot was sent out to calm the national public in the U.S. about the swine flu. And in an interview with NBC News, former Vice President Joe Biden, who was vice president at the time under President Obama, kind of inadvertently did just the opposite. During the course of this interview that you're not going to see, but I'll relate the content to you, the vice president says, again, he's supposed to calm people that it's okay to be out in public. It's okay to use public transportation and the airlines. And their specific question was about flying. And he said, well, I would tell my family not to fly. And I can imagine the echoes of the screams in the White House when Vice President Biden, who's supposed to be calming the nation, was instead inadvertently generating hysteria by saying he would protect his own family from flying. I think the aviation industry probably not going to be the first people to contribute to a Biden presidential campaign, because the memory of this misstep was pretty big. So keep the media fed. Number 7, the number one feature in any newspaper is not the crossword puzzle. It's not the comic strips. It is the corrections column, because the news media, while the First Amendment in our country here protects the ability of the news media to do their job, it is not a guarantee that they're going to get it right. Mainstream media that do the job the right way, try and follow the who, what, when, where, why, and how of a basic news story, still make mistakes. They allege something that's not true by just getting it wrong. The correction is usually buried on page 2A at the bottom in a one-column headline. But if they get something wrong in a story involving you or your client or your organization, you owe it to yourselves to correct the record. Particularly with the cloud today and search engines, you will have that bad news, that inaccurate bad news, living forever when it ought to be killed right away. So you have to seek a correction. You have to be willing to talk to the reporter and confront them politely but in a pushy way about where their facts are wrong. You may not like the story when they have the facts right, but you only can seek a redress of a grievance when they have the facts wrong or the story is not balanced. And you have to be willing to go above the reporter's head if the reporter shows an unwillingness to correct the mistake. We've gone as high as talking to a publisher or the general manager of a TV station when a reporter not only has it wrong and is unwilling to correct it, but digs in with an arrogance to protect their mistake. And in a couple of cases, reporters have been fired for the mistakes that we shared that they made either willingly or showed an unwillingness to fix it and shut down on us when we were trying to do the right thing. So never be afraid to challenge the media when they get it wrong. And so in the case of Waldo, that small town in Florida, which is our number 7 tip still about keeping the media corrected, frankly, it wasn't a speed trap. You have a federal highway and then a state road and then a county road and then a city street all in line on one roadway. And in the course of a mile or so, you have to go from 55 miles an hour to 45 miles an hour to 35 miles an hour to 20 miles an hour. Very few drivers are going to see all those signs where the speed limit changes in the course of a mile. So it is a speed trap. It absolutely is a speed trap if you don't look at the signs. But what it really is a city, a little small town, that wants people to be safe crossing the street, that wants drivers to be safe when they're driving through their town, to protect bicyclists and pedestrians. So what we told CBS News on behalf of the town of Waldo is that it's not a speed trap, but it's one of the safest places in the country where you could be a pedestrian or be a motorist or a bicyclist. And that made it onto the air of this national broadcast and kind of saved Waldo from being accused of being a speed trap because CBS balanced the story. I'm kind of pleased that among my favorite honors we've ever received, we got a key to the city of Waldo. I still drive carefully when I'm in Waldo. They no longer have a police department, but we helped them handle the crisis when they had it. So other crises that have been big news stories certainly include the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013, all the chaos that followed it. Media audiences were buzzing that there was a second shooting and arrests had been made. And so there was a calming by this belief that arrests had been made when really these two guys were still at large. And the Boston police did a terrific job of using every platform available to them to get the facts and the truth out there to calm people, but to let them know that there was still danger because they had not found the doers of the bombings. They did find them eventually, and the whole world watched that as it unfolded live, but they did the right thing, and that's a pretty good textbook example for a police agency of how to do it the right way. So number 8 is that you have to take real action steps to fix the problem. Whatever the crisis was, you have to show that you're putting in some corrective action. You have to be able to say, we're bringing in experts, we're bringing in some gray hair eminent expert to help us put in additional safeguards to make sure it can never happen again, whether it's a theft of $7 million or an accident where something breaks and people get hurt or killed. You have to be able to say those words. We're going to put in additional safeguards, policies, protocols, and procedures to make sure that this could never happen again. God forbid you hope that's the case. It may happen again, but during the crisis, you need the ability to say that by actively taking action steps, cooperating with the authorities, and bringing in outside experts, showing that you're fearless about looking at what you do and how you do it with a willingness to do it better. And one of the best cases of this is the Starbucks incident of a year or so ago. You may recall last year in a Starbucks, and there were hundreds of them around the country, 2 young black men were in a Starbucks waiting for a meeting, waiting for a third person to come for a meeting, and the manager of the Starbucks, because they weren't buying anything, called the police in to have them escorted out. It seemed to have a racial overtone to it. It certainly was insensitive, and the blowback was national. And here, unlike Boeing, the CEO of Starbucks did an amazing thing. He went on live, Facebook Live. He went on national television. He apologized immediately, within 24 hours or less. He shut down every Starbucks in the country to require mandatory sensitivity training for every member of their team, even the newest hire, even an intern. And that is a textbook example of handling a crisis well. This is not who we are, is what he said. That's not what Starbucks is about. So anybody working in a client organization or in your organization can make a mistake, a bad decision that creates the crisis. The people at the top have to act with urgency and imminence to take hold of this crisis, or again, the crisis after the crisis is mishandling it. So in this case, and you can look these videos up on YouTube of the Starbucks CEO, Kevin Johnson, doing it smack dab perfect, like a perfect golf shot, a hole-in-one. He nailed it. Another principle is you're expected to say good things about yourself, that, we found this problem, we're cooperating with authorities, we're bringing in outside experts to make sure it can never happen again. But when somebody else who's got great gravitas and credibility says good things about your organization, it resonates and is relevant in a different and in sometimes better way. So it's always good to get champions who are not a part of you or your client crisis organization to get out there and say good things about you. Bring in these third-party validators. It might be a lawmaker, a retired former mayor, a chamber of commerce president. The point is, people who aren't part of the organization but know it, say good things about it because they have a real experience with your goodness, and that whatever mistake or accident has happened is not who we really are. And then the last tip in our top 10 tips on crisis management is, even as you're dealing with the spit that's hit the fan, in a parallel path, as if it weren't happening, you have to open a proactive line of positive public relations and community relations and brand building, as if it weren't happening. Put your good news out there independent of the crisis. You got to still be dealing with the crisis in the crisis track, but when you have good news, don't sit on it because, oh my God, we can't do that now because we're going through this crisis. Fill the news spaces with good news about the organization too. Very important tip to open that positive track. And, the number of organizations that have done this, Chipotle has done it when they had a problem, a food contamination problem. They handled it, much like Starbucks, directly with immediacy, with giving it a sense of urgency, and they were treated well by the public and by people like us who watch how crises are handled. They did it the right way. So our top 10 tips, again, begin with have a plan and end with open a positive track, even as you're dealing with it. Our most important takeaway for you folks listening is to virtually never say no comment. You've got to be able to say something, even if you can't say much. You got to keep the news media fed. Somebody will tell your story for you with erroneous information and untruths if you don't tell it first and often in a disciplined way with the facts and the truth. So I know we're going to look for any questions from you all. I'm sorry that we had some problems with the videos, but it's been a great privilege for me to, in this collapsed way for these 40 minutes, present to you some crisis tips that hopefully are a primer for you on how to handle these kinds of things better. Get a plan, be willing to adapt it and adjust it as necessary, and don't be the crisis after the crisis by mishandling it. So I'm happy to welcome any questions with the help of Richard and Agility PR Solutions. Thank you all for the opportunity to visit with you.
All right, Ron, thank you. That was fantastic. You really know your stuff, and that was an incredible primer for anyone who hasn't put a lot of thought into crisis preparedness, even though I certainly hope that's not the case. If you're in PR these days, as fast as things move and as various, let's say, as the outlet opportunities are for getting bad news out there. So really enjoyed that. Very good points. I think you touched on everything. Really impressed with all that. So, all right, and we are going to jump right into the Q&A with Ron. And let me remind you that if you have a question for Ron, you can click on the Q&A icon in the top right corner of your screen, type in your question there, and send to all presenters, and we will see them there and bring them up. And it looks like we got little bit of time here for some good Q&A. So get those questions rolling. Maybe you have a situation you're trying to deal with now. This would be a good time to pick an expert's brain. All right, but let's review some of the things you said, Ron, and dive a little deeper.
Okay.
You're talking about the timing of your response. It's critical. We know that, and it certainly seems unlikely in this information age that the press will latch on to your crisis situation before you're even aware of it. If it happens late at night or something, but it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility, I guess. So if a reporter does call you after hours, is it better to immediately react on the spot, or maybe wait until you have everything together and consult with your team before you even take that call? I mean, silence can be deadly, but so can issuing a half-baked comment. So what would you suggest to do in that situation?
Well, I think that's a really smart question, and it reflects that the news cycle today is 24/7. So, yeah, you could be getting a wake-up call late at night from news media who are aware of a crisis that you're not aware of yet. I think what you have to do is buy a little bit of polite time. Ask them what their deadline is. Could they push it back half an hour? Let me find out what I can for you, Reporter X, and let me get back to you as timely as I can. I promise I'll call you back within a few minutes. And then try and gather at least a little initial information, provide some kind of placeholder statement, announce that there'll be a full briefing from the organization hours later as you continue to gather the facts and the truth. But again, you need to be monitoring those spaces once you know there's a crisis breaking, the social media platforms, where again, some people may be reporting, we have average citizens now who think they're news people with their cell phones, and they're posting content on media platforms and social media platforms. You have to be out there. Someone will be filling the space, telling your story with misinformation, untruths, inaccurate information. Again, tell your truth on your timeline, in your terms, in your turf. But the short answer to the question is, I'd get them some information as soon as reasonably possible, rather than say no comment, I don't know anything. You have to say something.
Right, indeed. Yeah, and timing is everything, especially these days. And Jeffrey offers up a kind of a follow-up question to that. And when he asks, how quick specifically should you be ready to respond? Even if it's just a simple tweet to let people know that you're looking into it. I mean, is there, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 1 hour? You mentioned 24 hours, and that's clearly, the broadest definition of a quick response. Do you think there is a timeline you should really look at?
No, let me reconfirm and clarify. 24 hours is way too long. You need to be able to instantly reply with something, but you've got to gather enough information to be able to offer something. But no comment is what you want to avoid. I can't really comment on that right now. Is the same as a no comment. You have to say something. Right. I'd gather a little bit of information. We're dealing with the authorities who are investigating this accident. We'll have an update for everybody tomorrow at 8 a.m. and then make that happen. But you've got to give something out. You've got to respond and speak on behalf of your organization in a sensitive way, particularly if there's injuries or deaths. So you can't afford to let this cruise until the next day. You have to have a situation room and a plan. Again, having a plan is where you anticipate this may be how it happens, that it breaks at night when we're asleep. You still have to be able to prepare and respond quickly. Right.
And so the key is to get something out there right away. I mean, as soon as you are physically and mentally able to do so.
And one of the first responsibilities for a crisis team is to have a holding message, is what it's called. With the little bit we do know, let's put together a few sentences that at least is a placeholder holding statement for the time being, but you can't just leave it there gathering dust once you put it out. You've got to update it with additional facts and the truth. Again, assume that everything's going to come out, every bad fact, every mistake somebody might have made in the organization. You can't cover it up. That again, is a crisis after the crisis. You got to be transparent. You got to be cooperative. You got to be collaborative. You got to be sensitive. But you also have to be timely.
Right. Got it. Okay. All right. Good. Thanks, Ron. And thank you, Jeffrey, for that question. And Michelle asks the question that kind of segues into that nicely. And then when you are trying to be consistent with your communication and you are trying to act fast, and this seems like you might assume this, but should you just immediately go to social media as your primary source because it's so immediate?
Well, certainly the social media platforms are essential for telling your story. You have to, use them in a positive, proactive way to get your facts and truth out there. You also have to monitor them for what others are saying about you, whether it's competitors who want to take advantage of you in this crisis situation, adversaries, disgruntled customers, or just somebody decides they want to do a Tanya Harding kneecap of your organization because it's fun to kick a down organization. You have to monitor that space for what's being said about you and choose selectively what to respond to and what not to. Sometimes by engaging, you may prolong the pain. So you really have to use good judgment about when to respond, but you have to err on the side of monitoring that space, proactively putting out your positive messages, even if it's bad news. You have to show that transparency, that candor, that courage to tell the truth. And again, any lie is going to be a big problem after the crisis.
Sure. Okay, good. Yep, that makes perfect sense. All right, thank you. And thanks, Michelle, for that question. Let's go on to Isabel's question here. First, she thanks you for a great presentation. I'm certain that we all feel that way. And her question is, you talked about third-party validators, and how early should you consider bringing one in, or how close or far behind or far removed should they be from your brand? Is there a credibility issue if you got somebody ready to jump right in on a crisis? It seems like you're maybe expecting a crisis, for example. Is there a timeline for that?
Yeah, the timeline is, I think, as soon as reasonably possible. And the way to do it, we shouldn't be looking for who that third-party validator is after the crisis breaks. Part of our crisis plan should be having a stable of curated folks, diverse folks, who know us, who love us, who have respect and credibility and gravitas, and who are known. These validators, independent of us, saying good things about us, are going to help us quite a bit in this crisis. And again, by having them locked in advance, their willingness to be there for you if there's a problem, they'll feel honored and respected that you're reaching out to them. Calling them in the middle of the night because you haven't done it in advance as part of a plan, that's when it becomes a bigger problem, because then you're not making your best decisions, you're emotional, and you're trying to find someone to say something good about you. These are people you're going to get up to speed about what happened when there is a crisis, and then roll them out appropriately to say their truth about you. Whether it's an op-ed, a comment to a news organization, a statement of their own, or being part of a press conference that you put together, it's going to help that people who are not inside the organization, who are credible and respected, are saying good things about you. And that's part of the plan from day one.
Right. Good. Yeah, okay, great. All right, thank you. That's great advice. And thank you, Isabel. Good question. Here's another good question from Melinda, and she asks, how do you kind of walk the fine line if you are a proactive and professional PR person, but your client kind of wants to stay quiet, at least for now, about what's going on, and that's not the right move? How do you handle a client like that?
Well, Richard, that's a really terrific question, and that goes back to this creative tension between the lawyers who often are involved in this situation, whether it's an in-house counsel or an outside lawyer, sometimes a combination of them. They almost always are advising, say nothing, say as little as possible. This is a matter that's going to be litigated. There are going to be charges filed, so on. So the creative tension is us pushing back politely but certainly to the client who have us because they want our advice and counsel too. We'll always show respect to the lawyers, even as we're slapping down their advice, by saying the court of public opinion, the judgment is swift if unsure, and if we do not speak on our own behalf, others are going to tell our story in ways that are not factual, not accurate, and don't serve us well. I would say we win most of those arguments, and the lawyers, and we work collegially, collaboratively. They're often involved in, helping edit the statement that we craft. Sometimes they edit it too much, but it's a creative process, and it's a respectable situation. We work with lots of lawyers. Lots of lawyers refer work to us because they know we're good at it, and they understand this principle that the court of public opinion has instant judgment, even if it's wrong. And so you have to be willing to face that glare of publicity early on and say something. No comment, unavailability for comment equates to a belief by readers and listeners and viewers, there must be something to this story. They must be hiding the truth. They must be lying. They're afraid.
Right. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. Obviously, you can't help someone who doesn't want to be helped, but most people, I think, would listen to that kind of reasoning, especially on the legal end. Yeah, that's good advice. Yeah, thanks, Ron. Yep, and thank you, Melinda, for that one. Okay, and Jeffrey has another question here, and this is another good one. If you're responding to your crisis situation, and it's easy, you're trying to think fast and act fast, and you might say something errant, off the cuff, in an off the cuff style. So, and you later learn that that wasn't the right thing to say or whatever. So, how would you address correcting that mistake? If you're on camera, or should you go to social media, issue a press release? What's the best way to do that?
Are you talking like a Sean Spicer kind of tendency?
Yeah.
Is that the issue? Well, first off, if you're doing a videotaped interview with a television reporter and you misspeak, unless they're really an obnoxious reporter, say, may I do that over again? I slurred my words. I really misspoke there. Most reporters, most camera people are going to let you do it again. Most of them are not there to be doing gotchas on you. But you have to have the temerity and willingness to say, can I do that again? Or if it's already out there, the misstatement, I misspoke. You need to correct your own mistake that way. But the better thing to do is to have a disciplined set of message points that you do not stray from. Whether you're doing a TV interview, whether you're talking at a press conference or putting out a statement, have a simple set of disciplined message points and stick to them. You may update those message points as more information is available as we know more and more about the crisis in the hours and days ahead. But stay on a disciplined message. Don't go off it. The problem a lot of people make, they try to be polite to a reporter who asks a question. You should always direct the response back on the path of our disciplined message points. Otherwise, you're being dragged down a rabbit hole, and that is where you commit the mistake of saying something that's not part of our main messages, and that may be the thing quoted in the newspaper or broadcast on TV or put on social media, and then it's got a life of its own, and it's hard to get rid of it.
Right. Yeah, it can really make a bad thing worse sometimes with just an unplanned, off-the-cuff response. That's why you need to have a plan.
Richard, if I could drill down on it just a little more. So let's just say a question comes up during a press conference, and the question is way off the content of our disciplined message points. You have to use a bridging or a blocking technique. Be polite, but push back and get back on our message. Well, that's an interesting point that you're saying as a reporter, but here's the important thing for people to know. Well, that's sort of a signal that, wow, what's coming next is really important, and all we're going to do is restate our disciplined message points. When you give up control of your message by getting off message, you have no control at all. So staying to a disciplined set of message points is the best way to make sure we get the facts and truth out to our story, and don't leave it to a reporter or editor to use the wrong soundbite or the wrong quote.
Right. Good advice. Indeed. All right. Great. Thanks. And thank you, Jeffrey. Another good question. And here's yet another from Wendy. And you were talking about spokespeople before, and that's obviously where your strategy sort of begins and ends with getting the right person to speak on your behalf. So how do you decide exactly who is your best spokesperson? Does it always need to be a high-ranking person or even a company representative? What are the characteristics that you're looking for?
Well, ideally, there's more than one key person at an organization who could serve as a spokesperson. I'd always want to make sure there may be 2 or 3 who are either gifted in that area naturally, trained in that area. They get it. They don't flap their eyelashes nervously. They don't twitch when they're on camera. They don't have a weak voice. They have a strong presence. They have a credibility to how they appear, to their energy. They have an earnestness, all of these qualities that you'd want in a spokesperson. And if you don't have it internally, yes, you can get that through an outside counselor who gets steeped in the facts and the truth and can speak on your behalf. For many clients, we've been there to be their liaison to the news media, speaking to the media behind the scenes and sometimes on the record. The client has to approve that. It's not an unusual, it's not a wrong thing for a big organization or any organization, government, private sector, not-for-profit, to have a communications firm helping them handle a situation, and it's okay to do it that way. It's all depending on where the organization's highest comfort level is. We've trained executives how to do this, and some of those same organizations have still asked us to be their media liaison on the record and sometimes on camera, case by case.
Right, I see. Good, yeah. That's often there are factors that are particular to your situation that you have to consider in that regard.
In a lighthearted way, over the years we've kind of collected quotes and sound bites from people speaking on behalf of organizations in crisis, and they sometimes shoot themselves in the foot while their foot is in their mouth. My favorite one is one where there's an accident that's happened, and the spokesperson, who's not particularly gifted in this area, says this, the reporter's question was, wow, this has to be like the worst accident ever for you guys. And the executive says, actually, no, this is not the worst accident our company's ever had. So now the reporter's not only going to be covering the instant accident, but wants some history and background about the prior one that was even worse. And now the story is worse because we've given them something they didn't have.
Right. Yes, I see. Indeed. Wow. Yeah, indeed. All right. Thanks. Yeah, great, Ron. And thanks again, Jeffrey, for that one. And let's go on to this question from Wendy. We've got just a few minutes left, so get your questions in if you want. Wait a minute. We're going to hold that one from Wendy for a second and go to this one from Martin, who, because we always wonder about this. You know, your brand is in crisis. They got caught red-handed or what have you, and people are trolling you hard on social media. And obviously you want to respond to them. Sometimes you get a little agitated. You might even get very emotional. Should you be responding to these people on social media? Is there a time when you just should not respond at all?
One negative kneecapper out there who, gets your anger up to the point where you're engaging in a ping pong match with them on social media probably worsens the problem rather than improves it. If there's information out there that's creating a dialogue and it's not accurate, I think what you do is you stay calm and you put the facts and the truth into your social media messages. A lot of this can be handled with content created in advance. You can anticipate that a crisis may be a physical one or a fiscal one and put some holding statements in the can that obviously need to be updated to the actual situation when you arrive at it. But it's a very sensitive thing about how you engage with people causing the conversation out there. You certainly don't want to leave inaccurate information hanging on the vine there, but you don't want to get into a back and forth because you're prolonging the conversation rather than putting an end to it with the facts and the truth.
Right.
So
and there's certain...
my way of handling it would be appreciate everyone's comments. Here are the facts and the truth, which is saying to everyone, this is really important stuff that follows. And I would then let that be the culture that we have at our organization for how you handle it. But we have experts in social media who help us interpret what to do. It's got to be a case decision as opposed to one rule for all situations.
Sure, yeah, because I guess you run the risk if you just keep responding. You're looking kind of defensive and probably a little desperate there, and that just exacerbates your situation.
And really, it gets you off your game of handling the overall crisis because we're down in some rabbit hole of one critic engaging in a lengthy conversation with them. It's distracting us from our overall strategy of what to do.
Right. Good. All right. Great. All right. Thank you. That makes perfect sense. And thank you, Martin. Great question there. Okay. Let me just touch on this before we close out, Ron, because I really want to drive this point home. You mentioned, and rightly so, that you should always tell the truth in your crisis response. That's what Mom always told us, right? But there are certainly people out there these days who don't seem to cater to that age-old truth. So when you say tell the truth, how much of it are you supposed to tell? I mean, lying is obviously never acceptable, but is it ever okay to withhold a few things? Where's the line there?
Well, I think, with your whole crisis team, which is the C-suite executives, your communications experts, and your lawyers, you have to make good decisions based on the nature of the crisis. But I would err on the side of candor and transparency unless there's information so sensitive that it's going to reveal a patient's personal information. You have to err on the side of disclosure because you get treated well for doing that. Withholding facts that could be shared is a disservice to the truth. So again, case-by-case decision-making, but err on the side of candor, disclosure, facts, and truth in a timely way. Even in a horrendous situation where a mistake's been made, people will be very forgiving of someone who's, basically contrite and candid and upfront about what went wrong and why, what we're doing to put in safeguards to make sure it can never happen again. But when you hide, when you evade, when you lie, you are disserving your organization. And the brand damage is more than money. It may be irreparable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what you always have to keep in mind, because there is that crisis recovery that needs to follow. And there's a timeline there you want to stick to, and all these things affect it. Okay. All right. Well, that's great advice, Ron. And we have other questions here that I'm afraid we're not going to get to. We've reached the top of the hour. But you see Ron's contact information there on the screen, so he's happy to have you reach out to him if you have a question that you'd like to ask him. So feel free to do that. So I want to thank Ron Sachs for all that insightful commentary. He gave us some great, wise advice and some excellent high-level points that he made. So thanks for spending some time with us today, Ron. We really appreciate you.
Well, Richard, I want to thank you, Agility PR Solutions, Bulldog Reporter, and all the kind folks that monitored this. Sorry about our problems with video. Hopefully you found the content very useful. And toward Richard's point, write me an email. I will answer every single one I get, I promise. And if you need to talk by phone, I'm happy to do that as well. But it's been a great privilege to be with you this hour. And I wish everybody no crisis in your future, but plan for it anyway.
That's right. There you go. All right, good. Thanks, Ron. And let me remind everybody that you will be receiving a recording of this event to share and re-listen within the next 48 hours. So this webinar series is brought to you by Agility PR Solutions, and you can check out their services at agilitypr.com. Let me tell you quickly, we've got another great presentation ahead in May where we're going to welcome Brian Kelly. He's the VP at Sage Communications. He will opine on another of our favorite topics, the art of pitching the media. That event is scheduled for May 29th. So more details will be coming soon, so watch your emails and social media for that. And we look forward to getting together again then. Thanks again to Ron Sachs, and thanks to everyone for listening. Have a great day.